Hello and welcome back to NAS Compares, and today we're going to do ourselves a very petty review, and we're going to review this. This is the new UniFi UNAS Pro 8, the follow-up to the now almost 1 year old UNAS Pro, that lovely little 7-bay 499 10G ready NAS appliance there. This is what pretty much everyone wanted last year. This is an 8 times SATA rack mount NAS with 2 M.2 NVMe bays on the rear, 3 technically 10GBE network ports, more on that later on, and it arrives with an internal removable PSU and also the option of adding a second one for redundancy. This is what people wanted, a lovely uniform 8 bay slots there on the front. This is lovely. However, I just can't call it perfect. There are things about this device in its presentation, there are things in the way it's being rolled out that for me just missed the mark ever so slightly. It is a great NAS device, as you're going to find in this video, and I would argue if you are on the fence about buying a UNAS Pro, I would bump the extra bit of money and go for this for reasons that we'll detail, but there is no denying that UniFi are still as close as they fly to the sun like Icarus. They're not quite there yet, and although they're rolling out more appliances for desktop and rack mount, fleshing out their portfolio in their phase 2 of NAS, this is by no means perfect. It's closer than they've got so far, but it's still not quite there. But let's start positive. I feel like I'm being really negative there in the intro. I like the 8 bay assignment here on the front. The 7 bay thing from the other one didn't really make sense to me. We've got plenty of passive cooling there, and we have ventilated cooling in the middle of the system and on the rear via multiple fans there. Fan control has been added now, something that was weirdly missing from its predecessor. You can scale up and scale down the cooling there actively when the system is in operation. It's a 2U. It also arrives with the rails included, something that is weirdly rare in the world of turnkey NAS, so at least you've got those included inside. It only has one PSU inside. You have to pay extra if you want a second PSU for redundancy there. Same goes for the M.2 NVMe slots that we'll return to later on. You do need to buy those separately. When it comes to drives inside there, you can use either their own labelled drives. This is an 8TB UniFi labelled drive. It's actually a Western Digital drive, but crucially, you can use your own drives. And I have tested 30TB Seagate Ironwolves in here, and they appeared, and I was able to create a RAID there. I didn't do it for extensive testing, so I wanted to switch over to a uniform 8x8TB inside for my tests, but still nonetheless, you can use other drives. Also returning to that subject of how it was presented and the fact it arrives not only with the rails, but a great little accessory kit. I generally don't talk about these things, but there's a bit of pro and con. Straight away, I like how protected this arrived, incredibly well protected. It arrived with everything, and there was lovely tape across each of the bays to stop them moving in transit, something a lot of brands do not do. But at the same time, I've got to say, UniFi, you use way too much plastic. So if you could just do something about all of this, that would be fantastic. But again, you've got the handles, you've got the rails with it, it's well protected in transit. Got to give them kudos for that. Drive installation is really clean and easy. These are toolless trays, although you can use 2.5-inch drive screws in there, and they're included with the accessory kit. Drives are slotted in really easy with a lockable motion there that keeps the drive in place. But on top of that, you can slot the drive in really easily. And again, you can run this device on 1 or 2 drives if you choose, or fully populate on day one. There isn't an official expansion at this time. Hopefully they work on that. But I will say, one, I don't like that I can't lock these drive trays. I wish there was a locking mechanism there. Secondly, I wish it had that lovely little LCD display that the UNAS Pro has, because you could control and navigate and find real-time information about the device, and it was actually responsive. I get it, space is at a premium here, but I wish they found a way to include it maybe on the top, maybe on the side if you're railing it out from an existing rack. But it was quite nice to have that rather than having to go through the rigmarole of 2-step verification and logging in via the GUI to find out real-time information or using the mobile app, when it was quite good to have that on site there. Turning things around to the rear, you can see 2 PSUs there. As mentioned, you only get 1 with the base level price of this device, and you can buy a secondary PSU. Again, when you look at the UNAS Pro that came before it, they didn't really have anything like that. It was utilizing the whole kind of power backup thing that UniFi have. This is something between redundancy and a UPS, but not really. This is nice to have both of those. There's no USB, though, I will say, for a traditional UPS to send a heartbeat to the device. But still, nonetheless, I did do a PSU pull test on this and tested both of those PSUs while doing a repeated AJA read-write test, and throughout the course of it, it was seamless. There was no drop by the system. The carryover and the failover was seamless there. Now, you may have noticed here on the other side, we've got ourselves 3 10 gig ports there. It's not front mounted like the previous device, which was sort of weird. This one has got them all on the rear there, and as you can see, we've got 2 SFP 10 gig ports and we've got a copper 10 gig port there. Now, and we will return to this subject later on, I will say, what overkill, what insane overkill for that network connectivity there. Even if 2 were sharing and we say that there's 20 gig max, you've only got 8 SATA bays inside this device, and we'll get to those M.2s in a moment. 8 times SATA was only just about, even with SATA SSDs, was going to do a half-decent job saturating one of those 10 GBE. So I know it's a weird criticism, but I've got to say, 310 gigs is odd overkill here. And yes, it means failover at high performance there. It also allows an offset there and obviously support of multi-channel there, or depending on your client device and more, is going to be quite handy in the switches you use. But still, nonetheless, I'm surprised how much they've doubled down on network connectivity there on this device. But I am going to say I have got mixed good and bad feelings about M.2 integration into this device. So let's start positive. Number one, I think it is one of the best integrations of M.2 on a rack mount, or indeed a desktop, that I've ever seen. Based here on the rear of the device, we have 2 M.2 slots, and inside these are trays that you store the M.2 inside. It goes inside this little panel, and then it slots directly into the device. Each one of these little modules, by the way, has got a heatsink and a thermal pad that directly attaches to an SSD inside there, 2280 length, and it goes all the way up, by the way, to 22110, and they slot directly inside, and they're immediately visible within the GUI. It is that straightforward. You don't need to use 2, but obviously, depending on what you're going to use them for, you might well benefit from that. So, what's not to like? As pleased as I am about the integration of M.2 on this device, I will say, you see these here? These things that look like clips? These don't arrive with the device. These are actually purchased separately. These are pre-filled 2 TB modules from UniFi's own site. These have got 2 TB to slot in good to go. But although you can use a hex screw, weird choice by the way, to remove the top of this panel and install your M.2 of choice, and it will work within the device, because these trays don't arrive with the default package, even though Rails and more did arrive, it means that even if I want to use my own M.2, I still need to buy their M.2 trays to get things up and running, install my own drives. And I'm not a huge fan of that. The next thing that I wasn't a huge fan of is the idea that once you go into the storage manager, and we'll touch on this a little more later on, is the fact that you can only use these for caching. You can only use them for read-write caching. So write caching means when you're uploading data to the system, it writes it onto the SSD to be quick to imbibe it into the system, and then in the background moves it over to the hard drives. When it comes to read caching, it means that when some data is being regularly accessed, generally small data, I/O data, it means that that data is then copied over to the SSDs, for therefore that more common access data is then accessible from a much faster area of storage. It doesn't move the data, it doesn't tier it, it just allows it to be put somewhere where it can be accessed frequently. Well, have I got a problem? Number one, you can't use these drives currently for storage pools. Maybe that'll be something they add later, but right now you can only use them for caching, which is not going to be great for an ARM-based processor NAS, where it would be nice to be able to use faster access storage to enjoy these 10 GBE ports. Secondly, you can't set the I/O on that cache. It is automated and it's based on how the system is accessed, but I know there are some NAS brands out there that allow you to adjust what the SSD cache is going to be used for, and it allows you to be better for larger, blocky, sequential data, or high volume, high frequency, small scale tiny data like metadata, again like I/O data. Not having that adjustment. Yes, UniFi is still relatively new in the NAS space, and not every NAS brand offers this service anyway, but it would have been nice to have at this sort of scale. And also, as a quick aside, these get pretty hot. Now, again, it's still going through early development, this device, and no doubt these are things that will be tweaked over time. We saw exactly the same thing with the UNAS Pro, but these M.2s did kind of get quite warm when it was in operation. When I powered down this device to have it here on the table for the review, I quickly ran a thermal imaging camera over these, and these were hitting 50s. Now, yes, one might argue that is the drive casing doing its job, dissipating the heat. But for an ARM-based processor, I'm just amazed how hot this drive was getting, given the low-level base hardware inside this device would have been able to push a drive like this in the first place. Now, in terms of internal hardware, this system arrives with a quad-core ARM-based processor, so none of your highfalutin server-grade AMDs, none of your Intel integrated graphics processor. This is still an ARM. They're keeping things painfully efficient. But I will say, they've scaled up that memory. It's got 16 gig of LPDDR4 memory inside. You can't upgrade it, but that's still a huge amount of memory to be getting on with. To put that into perspective, when I was setting up the device for the first time with 8 TB drives, I saw the RAID be completed in around 12 hours for 8 times 8 TB drives with no kind of RAID resync priority or anything like that. That's not the quickest, but for an ARM-based processor, it wasn't that bad. And I saw the memory getting quite heavily used during that time as well. Also, the operating system lives internally on a small area of storage. It rated on the internal storage monitor as 25.2 gigabytes. I think it's more likely a 32 gig with a little bit of OP wrapped around it there. So you're not running the operating system on the individual drives. And also with the individual drives, we'll go into more detail later, but you can run not only your standard RAID all the way up to RAID 5, RAID 6, but you can also do clustered RAID, which is quite good to create a single storage area that's made up of groups of mixed drives in their own RAID, all banded together into one storage area. There's also support of things like hot swapping. There's also support of failover there. I actually quite like the way they've integrated storage in the recent updates. More on that later. In terms of performance, again, with 8 times 8 TB drives, I saw performance of around 800 to 850 megabytes per second. I didn't have any SATA SSDs, unfortunately. I'm sure I could have cracked 1 gigabyte per second very, very easily. And again, that was in a RAID 5 environment. Had I gone for a RAID 0, I reckon it definitely would have hit 10 gigabit per second. But I will say, again, because of the ARM-based processor, write performance was definitely something lesser than that of read performance there. Not unusual with an ARM, and even with that 16 gig of memory, the performance there. And again, we've got a whole big tester video coming out soon where we've really put this through the paces, where we're hopefully going to put together soon. But overall, I've got to say the base level hardware for the price point and for the kind of user this is targeted towards isn't bad. It's just not earth shattering. But let's be realistic, most users are buying something like this because they want storage. They want a traditional NAS. So let's crack into the UniFi NAS software and see just how that's developed over the year and just what you are getting for your money in this turnkey solution. Okay, so here we are on the desktop of the UNAS Pro 8. They really have gone for that single pane of glass user interface here where they're trying to cram as much information to here as possible. I will say early doors, I kind of wish some of these boxes here on the left were kind of consolidated here into the middle, or that I could drag them in. It was a little bit more customizable perhaps. Unfortunately, it's not there. I'm accessing this via the web browser via my UI.com account, but you can't access this full user interface on the local area network. You completely sever, if you choose to, access via the UI.com services. If you choose to, it can be done totally local or totally remote. It's really up to you. And all of that can be managed via the console, again with remote access switch on or off as you choose to. The same goes, by the way, if you go to individual users, by the way. So if you want to create individual users, you can ensure that some of those users can only access this via the local area network. If you choose to, you can also set it up that if they are admin or not, predefined roles, it's all accessible and customizable. There's still a little bit of work to be done there, I would say, by UniFi, but it's still quite nicely wrapped around and presented there early doors. So let's talk first about the way it handles storage. At the top left of the screen, we've got the storage box here. Also, by the way, I probably touched on this earlier, you can adjust the fans on this system in terms of noise and of course system cooling. I've had the system up and running now for the better part of, I think, about 30-40 minutes since rebooting the device for this review after all of the other tests. We'll get onto temperatures later on. But at least for now, if we go into the storage manager, we can find out more information. Now, I touched on this earlier. I really like that you can cluster some of these RAIDs together. So if you do have different drive sizes, you can cluster them together for multiple storage pools if you choose to. And the same goes, by the way, with utilizing those M.2s if you choose. So as you can see there, I've got an M.2 in one of the pools. I decided to do it this way just to show you that you don't need to populate both. But if you choose to, You can assign that to one of those storage pools if you like. And on top of that, if you've got multiple drives, you can use that RAID 1 environment. But again, no ability to turn those into a storage pool. You can only assign them to existing storage pools if you choose to. It's that straightforward. It's easy. And of course, you can change some of your RAID configuration choices depending on the drives that you've got inside. And there is support of multiple different kinds of RAID configuration, as you can see there. And it's nice to have. Also, there is a file folder level access here. I will say it still needs a little bit of work. I know it's an ARM CPU, and I like the fact that if we go in, for example, we can look at all the files and folders, double click, change the views if we like. We can share those files really, really easily with native right click options if we choose to. We've got a little bit of data about the individual files there. We can create a share link if we choose to, how long the link will last, who can access it, if it's account holder or not, whether it's got a password, give it a sell by date if you choose to. On top of that, if we wish, from here we can also change some of those snapshots. So we can create individual snapshots to roll back files if we choose to an older revision, and that goes all the way down to the folder level if we like. On top of that, if we go back to the main file folders, we can change who can access these really, really easily on the fly. So again, as you can see from that quote unquote secret drive, we've got that snapshot creation there that we can choose the schedule for it, create a brand new snapshot on the fly if we choose, or we can also create an encrypted drive if we choose. This encrypted drive, by the way, when you reboot the system, will require the password to be entered, which is what I want in an encrypted drive. I don't really like it when systems automatically mount encrypted drives on the fly. You can have it if you choose to, but otherwise, I really like it that an encrypted drive, if the system reboots on an update, or if someone steals the system and reboots it, even if they've got the system password, they can't automatically access encrypted folders without the encrypted folder password. All that said, an original criticism I had for the previous generation device released last year, there's still no support of iSCSI, and on a device that's got 3 times 10 gig connections, I'm really gutted that I can't create a big raw blob of storage using iSCSI there for, you know, photo and video editing and more. I know it's an ARM CPU, but it would have been nice to have, and I have seen ARM-based systems support iSCSI in the past. On top of that, when it comes to backup operations, we've already talked about snapshots there and how we can set those up, individual schedules to individual shared areas of storage if we like, with their own snapshots routines, all the way up to 256 of those, and this is running on BTRFS, by the way, for its file system. But backup operations can come down into 2 different forms. Now, we've got wholesale file folder backups, and we've got system configuration backups. So a system configuration backup allows you, if you connect the UI.com account, to create a backup of the NAS configuration, file folder structure, users and more, and back it up to your UI.com account. And then if you want to reformat the system or set up a brand new one, you can restore that backup on the fly. You can also download it as a local backup if you choose to, if you want to restore a UNAS device without utilizing the UI.com services. It's a nice middle ground between the two. When it comes to file folder level access and backups, it's actually pretty darn straightforward. Give it a name, so in this case we'll call this test2. From there you select the folder on the device you want to back up, and that extends, by the way, if you're an admin, to individual user accounts. So again, if you have unlocked the encrypted drive, you can back up the encrypted drive, but you still need the password. But you can select any or all folders you like. From there, you then select your target. So from there, we got select another UNAS Pro that you may have via your UI.com account or on the local area network. Choose to back up to another NAS device using its IP, or you can go ahead and use a cloud service with multiple available. You do have to link that account when you're ready. From there, you then select the folder from the shared area that you want to choose on your cloud, and then after that you can say the rules. So do you want it to always overwrite? Do you want to create brand new repositories of data every time? You can set that up. The same goes for setting up a schedule for those backups, daily, weekly, monthly, and then this gives you an option, unlike snapshots, to allow an off-site backup of that data on the fly. It doesn't mount cloud storage, but it is allowing you to back up data from this NAS onto a cloud service. As you can see, I have set up both a Google Drive backup there that's happening daily, and alongside that I've created a backup onto another UniFi NAS device there. We can manage and configure that on the fly whenever we choose, or action it immediately on the fly. Now, if you don't want to access the device via the UI.com window here, and you just want to access it using your client hardware and client operating system, you do have access to things like NFS and SMB there. But I will say there's still a few bells and whistles missing here. They don't cover the same level of file service protocol that other NAS brands have in the market right now. And when you do set up the access, it is still going to be a little bit limited there on that ARM processor. Remember, write performance on an ARM CPU is never really as good as a good old x86 processor from the likes of AMD or Intel, but still nonetheless, at least it's there. And as you can see, all three network connections have got their own unique identity on the IP. And you can go into the control pane, by the way, and you can manage that quite easily as well. There's not the best number of services, I will say, and again, you've got that option there for negotiating down on some of those speeds on the SFPs, but bonding them and stuff like that, there's not a huge number of management options there, and it's going to be requiring a lot more of your client OS overhead. Also, there is a lack of things like scheduled on and off, so a real complete cut down air gapping system is missing here. So for example, if I want the system to be off outside of operational hours or when I'm asleep, or the ability to just turn off one of those individual ports on a schedule would have been nice to see, and hopefully that is something that UniFi integrate into a further update down the line, but it is still absent right now. But those individual users, you can at least limit some of their access, notwithstanding that you can bind these to existing UI.com accounts, which in of themselves have got two-factor authentication, have, multi-factor using the UniFi Verify app. But on top of that, you can go in and set up the identity program here, which is a client tool that effectively limits and monitors and further ensures security on remote accessing connected users there with verification codes and more. So it's quite handy to have to set the device up for further secure access with your connected users. I will say though that the system, because of a lot of work being done there by that ARM processor, the system does get kind of hot, even with management of fans control there. As you can see with that fan managed mode there, I've got it on balance. I've kept it to the standard. I've only just recently rebooted this system. So if we go into the control plane, go into the console, find out more information about this system in operation, as you can see there, I'm not doing very much. I'm using, just over 3 gig of that huge amount of memory there. 16.6 gig is actually kind of a weird number, so there must be more than 16 realistically. The temperature is still at 74 degrees there. And if we go into the drive temperatures there, and again, I'm using 18% of the CPU, and I'm still not doing a vast amount on this system right now. If we go into the storage area and we have a little look at the temperatures of the individual storage drives, we're able to see that the drives are sitting at 46, 47, 38 there. And the SSD, as mentioned, is not too hot, but it can get quite hot quite quickly. Overall, I'm still quite happy with this software. The system probably needs a little bit more optimization, I'd say. And 1 year for NAS software development is not a long amount of time. And things like a lack of client tools for Windows and Mac for like file pinning, on-the-fly files, sharing and streaming to make it comparable to something like the big players from Synology or even Dropbox and Google Drive are still missing and hopefully on the way. But overall, I really still like what UniFi have done with this software. They've gone it their own way. They've integrated NAS control in the same way that we've seen them implement it on the likes of their switches and routers, but still it might not be for everyone. But let's head back into the studio and summarize today's review. As UniFi continues to expand its NAS portfolio, the UNAS Pro 8 addresses a lot of issues and concerns that users had with the UNAS Pro released in late 2024. It expands the storage somewhat, it expands power failover there, network connectivity, some of the RAM inside, the way the unit is presented, what you are getting included with it, and is a much more confident step by UniFi and Ubiquiti, of course, in this area of NAS where they expand this portfolio as, frankly, certain NAS players in the market right now continue to leave money on the table. I think this is a better purchase than the UNAS Pro. Even if you have bought the UNAS Pro last year, don't think you need to sell up and get hold of this. The improvements this brings are not improvements of performance. They are improvements of a little bit more storage, a little bit more failover, and a little bit more network connectivity, which we have to keep in mind, once again, is still based on 8 bays of SATA saturation, and alongside those M.2s for caching. The improvements this brings are notable, are good, and for the price point are damn near irresistible for some. But we have to keep in mind that this isn't a solution that is replacing the UNAS Pro. This is going to exist in an extended portfolio, and in that world, as we see the brand talk about more and more NAS for desktop and rack mount, this is a solid release. But seriously, UniFi, open up those M.2s for use outside of caching. Start including the drive trays for those M.2s. It's a little bit penny pinching that I have to go out and buy M.2 trays for my SSDs. Having a redundant power supply device with only one PSU included out the gate, roll out a secondary version of this that arrives with those trays, arrives with the PSU, bump the price by $50, $75 or whatever. But the promise of extra accessories when you're going to include things like the rails for this system just become ever more notable. It is a solid solution, and it is a solution that can be used with and without a UniFi network, which has to be given to their credit, I have to say. But still, nonetheless, this is still not the perfect NAS from the brand, and 1 year on from last year, I don't think they're quite ready to dominate the market quite yet. But what do you think? What do you think about this device? Is this the one you've been waiting for? Did you buy the UNAS Pro and this has made you think, no, I'm okay with what I've got? Maybe you looked at an alternative brand and this has turned your head. Let me know in the comments. Now, again, this video, they've supplied the hardware. UniFi haven't paid for this video. They've not given any money for this video. They have no say over this video. Them sending this kit is only half the story. We get to say what we want to say and make the review that we want to make. But we can't do that without support. If you don't want to do Patreon or Ko-Fi, I get it, it's annoying. But if you've enjoyed this video and if you were going to get a hold of this device, please, please, please use the links in the description in order to do so. We get a small commission from any of those purchases, and it allows us to keep doing what we do, the support system, the multitude of forums, the website, the reviews, the guides, and more. It's a passive way to support what we do, but it's up to you if you want to use it. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.